All right, so I get to introduce our speaker tonight, Donna Erickson. So her presentation is titled, and this is also the title of her book, Rooted at the Edge, Ranching Where the Old West and the New West Collide. Donna Erickson was raised riding horses, putting up hay, and herding cattle at the Skyline Ranch at the edge of Missoula, Montana. Part of the third generation at the Skyline Ranch, Donna never found a niche for herself and her young family there. She left ranching in 1986. Her love of both the land and design led her to a career in landscape architecture. While pursuing a graduate degree at a Dutch university, she developed an expertise in planning for rural environments and in conservation planning. Donna was a professor of landscape architecture and planning at the University of Michigan for 16 years, conducting research and teaching mainly graduate students. This period deepened her understanding of the interaction between ecological processes and landscape change. She is the author of a book on open space conservation, which she completed as a Fulbright scholar at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. She has published dozens of scholarly journal articles and popular pieces for the Montana Magazine. Donna started the Missoula firm Erickson Consulting, Inc. in 2005, consulting with dozens of nonprofit land trusts. Her business specialized in open space planning, organizational development, and land conservation, with the primary goal of protecting intact rural landscapes and strong communities, with her work eventually leading her back to the North Hills. So without further ado, please welcome Donna Erickson.
Thank you so much for being here this evening. It's a great treat to be here in Helena. And thank you to the Montana Historical Society for hosting this, and to the library as well. So, where'd my notes go? Hello. I left them there. Okay. Not the best start, right? So I'll be talking about my book that came out the spring of 2025, Rooted at the Edge. And what I'd like to do today is just give a short background about the topics and the themes of the book a little bit, and then do a couple of very short readings from it, just so you get a flavor for what the book is. It's creative nonfiction. And I'll explain more about sort of what the book entails as I go along. I'd like to, after the readings, I'll have time for a little bit of discussion or Q&A. I hope people have comments and questions. And then at the end, I'm certainly available to sign books back in the corner with Allie. So, how many of you are familiar with the layout of Missoula? Missoula, yes. Quite a few people, good. Well, you'll recognize this shot then, I think. It was taken by a friend out of an airplane, of all things. And it is in the book, the aerial that goes over the Missoula Valley. So I grew up here in the North Hills, which you see in the background of the picture, on Skyline Ranch. And it's that hilly area of land between the city of Missoula, where there's kind of a hard boundary between the city. I-90 makes that boundary largely. And then the Rattlesnake Recreation Area to the north behind it, and then the Rattlesnake Wilderness farther beyond. So that hilly area I'm tethered here to this. Hopefully I won't blow it. This hilly area right here is the North Hills, and the top of that treed ridgeline is the top of the ranch that I grew up on. Here's another view, a mapped view, and so you see the north side of Missoula, the north and west side historic neighborhoods of Missoula, the freeway going through, and then the North Hills. So the area that I studied and that I'm going to talk about today is really that landscape between the Rattlesnake Valley on the east and Grant Creek on the west, for those of you who know the layout of Missoula. And then another one here from the top of the North Hills, from the top of our ranch, looking out over the Missoula Valley, looking south. So this landscape supported Native Americans for many hundreds of years before it was settled and sustained by 5 generations of people of European descent. It's an area that I researched. I have strong personal ties there, but researched the history of these ranches. And the whole region is really, this region at the edge of Missoula is really steeped in history, in strife, and in beauty. And I'm going to touch on a little of all 3 of those as we go along. This is the place where 3 ranches were homesteaded within a couple years of each other, actually, in the 1880s. And in the late 19th century. It's not the best farmland. This isn't the good farmland of Grass Valley and the areas west of Missoula. It's good for grazing cattle. It's fairly dry. And this is a kind of unique spot that I've taken this photograph from, where you can actually see the buildings of all 3 of the ranches that I write about in the book. This is Skyline Ranch, where I grew up, and goes farther to the north. The Moon Randolph homestead here, and Hellgate Ranch there on the left. So this one of the themes of my book is really about a rich interconnection historically and in the present, and probably going into the future, of this ranchland right at the edge of town, and the great, or complicated, I would say, interaction with the city itself and the urban neighbors that these ranches have. So I wrote the book to share stories about a century of change on this iconic landscape, and the threats it faces going forward. And the other, sort of a broader view of the work that I did, and what I hope the book accomplishes, is to talk about similar places in other cities that are growing rapidly and that have ranches right at the edge of town. So this is a photo from the early 40s of my grandpa on our place, mowing hay and by horse. And so I really looked back at the history of all 3 of these places right here at the edge of town, and how they've changed over time. So the book is really a meditation on this place. It springs from both my upbringing on Skyline Ranch in the North Hills and my professional life as a landscape planner. It's a personal account showing how my worldview and my profession were shaped by roots in this landscape. And so here you see it from back around, I think, in the Patty Canyon area of Missoula, again looking north toward the Rattlesnake. So initially the book was meant to be a sort of natural history of the North Hills. The critters and the flowers and the ponderosas and so forth. And I do discuss the native vegetation and the landforms of this place. But like most books, over time, and I should say it took me off and on 15 years to write this. And so over that period of time, it of course morphed quite a bit. And my little writing group that I was in kept asking me for more of me in the book, and a connection to my professional background, and maybe a bit less of the plants and the stories of the natural history. So I took that to heart, and the book ended up has a lot of personal and family stories of the North Hills. But I will say it's not a memoir per se. The landscape itself is the central character of the book. So the North Hills symbolize issues that are at play at the edge of many Western towns. There's increasing homogenization of the landscape. There are places where ways of work and ways of life are changing dramatically and even vanishing. So many rural places are on the threshold of really dramatic change caused by high land values, aging owners, high property taxes, low commodity prices, housing needs, etc., all adding up to dramatic landscape change. And so here you see the sort of mini ranches. This is a view down from our fence line looking east. So again, the themes of the book about the opportunities and challenges of all of this landscape change is applicable in Jackson Hole and Bend and Bozeman and elsewhere in the West. So ranching next to urban neighbors creates unusual difficulties. And I've really been surprised as I've talked to book clubs and various audiences around Missoula, and talked with people who live really fairly close to these ranches and weren't aware until they read some of this writing about the real challenges of trying to ranch next to urban neighbors. And so I'm hoping that that is a benefit over time that my book has. So the unusual difficulties go from trespassing to guns, to fire, to dogs, to garbage, illegal hunting, etc. So these and other factors are just part of the strife that I mentioned earlier in my introduction. So here you see a little piece of ground, only 8 acres on our place up toward the top of it, that were burned by a guy doing who knows what, accidentally left his wallet behind as he ran off. So that helped a lot. And ironically, it did not get, this is a big draw with ponderosa pines. The fire only got to the base of one of them. That tree might die, we're not sure. So it could have been catastrophic. I mean, this is a 1,000-acre ranch and it burned 8 acres. And it's the first time there's been a fire on our place since my grandfather was farming there in the 30s and 40s. So pretty spectacular, and hopefully that doesn't mean we're due for the big one, but could be. So I bring up fire, but I have a lot of stories in the book about the issues with trespassing and guns and dogs, and of course anywhere. Oh, here's another one of from that fire I mentioned in my grandfather's day, and that's a tie that he sunk and did a half a mile of this, I think, a tie that he sunk probably 3-4 feet in the ground, and that charred side of it shows that fire from the 1940s. Let's see. So anywhere there's elk, there's going to be hunters, and so the issues with trespassing. I mean, one of the great stories my mom has, who still lives on this ranch, was going up to check cattle around opening day, and she was on horseback and came across a couple, a man and wife and a teenage son, all carrying big game rifles. And she only had the horse. She had no protection. And they claimed that they had come up there to see the sunset or sunrise. Yeah, right. So, that's one of many, many stories of kind of the struggles that go on. Now, the other flip side of all of that, in terms of ranching next to urban areas, is the great opportunity of having urban neighbors. They love these places. They're more important than ever for recreation, for scenery, for water quality, for wildlife habitat, and so forth. So the urban neighbors are important, and the more they love these places, the better chance we have of having them protected. Missoulians are really drawn to the North Hills. I mean, the trail on Waterworks Hill, I think you could see from the moon. It's so overused. And so there's this real special sense of, historically, there was a real special sense of community between these ranchers near town and the townspeople. And they would come and they'd do U-pick, or they would be labor on the farms. And those people were far fewer generations away from the farm, so they understood farming and ranching. And nowadays it's a little bit different. And the people in town value a kind of a different thing than the ranchers do. And the example I give is my mom and her colleagues on the ranches up there. They talk about what comes off the place. They're interested in what comes off the place. Yeah, they care about the scenery and the bitterroots and the pea pines and so forth. But they have coming at it from a very different perspective. Whereas again, people more and more in town are caring about the scenery and recreation potential. So there's this automatic disconnect about how that land is used and what will happen to it going forward.
What do you mean by what comes off?
Cows. In these cases, coal. There were small coal mines, low quality coal mines up there. The products that went to town. And in my grandfather's day, a lot of produce came off of these big dry hillsides. Rhubarb and raspberries and potatoes. A lot of produce came off these places and fed people in town. I'm going to come back to that point toward the end. Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. So again, some of the people using it. The book is partly about redefining that ranch-town connection in a new way. After all, if the land is to be conserved in the future, it's really these city people who are going to pay for it. And so that's a key factor. And that's happening. That kind of public investment in land conservation is happening around the state, as you know, including here for sure. So I want to do 2 or 3 short readings, 3 if I have time. I want to save time for Q&A and for you guys looking at the books back there. But I'll start with, I have one that takes place on our ranch, on Skyline Ranch. A second is a little vignette from the ranch next door. And a third takes place outside of the North Hills, but relates to it. So the first one is from a chapter called The Lone Pine that you see here. And it basically takes place in 2003, after a memorial service for my stepfather that happened in town, and then people went to the ranch, relatives and friends went to the ranch afterwards. That's kind of the background of it. We drove the quarter mile to the tree in my parents' rig, kids bouncing in the bed of the pickup like the old days. We parked on a knoll, walked to the tree, and strolled around it, talking, mourning, and soaking up the late summer sun. The more agile among us, like my firefighter son Rye, climbed the tree and looked down on us and out across the Rattlesnake Valley. The tree is a ponderosa pine. It's my family's heart pine. In woodworking, the phrase is used to indicate old growth wood that is denser, more tightly grained, and stronger than fast-growing timber. Old growth features in the wood begin to appear when the tree is about middle age, 100 years or more in the case of ponderosas. I don't know the age of the lone pine. Its heart is measured in other ways, as a symbol of the ranch and our family over time. A named living thing gathers its own lore. 5 generations have cherished this tree and its location, at the same time sheltered and open as a sacred place. Fitting as ponderosa is the Latin word for heavy, weighty, or significant, referring to the tree's impressive size and stature. The lone pine grows on the top of a small knoll with its back to a larger hill. I realize that trees don't really face one way or another, like a Christmas tree in the corner of the living room with the good side turned outward. But to me, the lone pine faces east, only feet from the eastern fence line of the ranch. We share this landmark, knowing that it has meaning for Rattlesnake Valley residents as well. They can clearly see this sentinel on the ridge above them. The tree is one symbol of the North Hills. If elk are the charismatic megafauna of the North Hills, the ponderosa pine, or pea pine as the locals call it, is the charismatic megaflora, although grass is the dominant native vegetation. Ponderosas have many other nicknames, such as bull pine, used to describe young, fast-growing stands. On the highest ridge of the big pasture, stately ponderosas grow in park-like groves, easily recognizable by their shape, straight, tall trunks topped by an open, irregularly shaped crown. The bark of the older tree becomes orange-brown, organized in large flaky pieces like flaky plates like jigsaw puzzle pieces. The mosaic of plates stands out against the black furrows between them where the bark splits. Native Americans ate the ponderosa's seeds and created dugout canoes from its logs. They used its pitch to waterproof baskets, repair canoe leaks, make ointment for back pain, and treat boils. They peeled the outer bark back to harvest and eat the sweet inner bark. We love the ponderosa pines in 2 different ways, as a community and as one individual. The timber in the big pasture, that's that highest ridge line that you saw in those first photographs, is special, but more as a community than as individuals like the lone pine. We take visitors to enjoy the view from the top over the Missoula Valley, a scene framed by big old ponderosas. It is where we enjoy hillsides of arrowleaf balsam root in the spring, watch the 200-head North Hills elk herd in the fall, or scare up rough grouse in the winter. Birds love ponderosa stands, and it's common to see mountain bluebirds, raptors, and great horned owls. The lone pine, not a particularly stunning specimen of Montana's state tree, is the place for family ritual. It is not tall and dignified. A mature ponderosa pine averages 100 to 150 feet tall, with majestic limbs angling out and up. Stately trees in their prime, ponderosas turn into beautiful, gnarly snags when they die. Unlike those up on the ridge of the big pasture, the lone pine is more squat and wide, about 50 feet tall, and with a trunk 3 feet in diameter. Like all ponderosas, it flaunts spectacular buckskin red bark and graceful needles packaged in bundles of 3. Its lower branches are easy to reach, whereas many ponderosas its age have lost their lower branches and don't provide quite as much shelter or climbing potential. Here's another shot of it looking down over the Missoula Valley. My grandparents named the tree as they ate picnic lunches under its boughs in the 1940s and 50s. My Norwegian grandfather was a proponent of the short digestive nap after lunch. I imagine him dozing on a plaid blanket spread on a bed of tawny needles, the vanilla fragrance from the sun-warmed bark wafting down. The pine scent is known for having a clarifying, uplifting, and invigorating effect. My aunt, now 94, tells me that the lone pine sheltered her and her first boyfriend as they shared an initial kiss back in the mid-1940s. Through the 1960s and 1970s, I rode horseback to the tree hundreds of times, a private place for contemplation and peace. On that September day of Dad's funeral, my cousin and I recalled the tree as an important landmark in our youth. I often rode horseback to her house in a subdivision just over the hill in the Rattlesnake Valley. She'd swing on and we'd ride double back to the lone pine, tie the horse to a branch, and climb the tree. My mother as a child had traced the same route, riding even farther across Rattlesnake Creek to see friends who lived on a small dairy on the flanks of Mount Jumbo. Those casual horseback trips from the ranch into the Rattlesnake are impossible now. Large houses pepper the land in what seems a random pattern, a common sight at the edges between Missoula and once productive Ranchland. The second one is from a chapter called You Can't Eat the Scenery. And it takes place on the ranch next door, describing a bit about our neighbor. A breeze blew in from the west, spinning a whirligig on its post outside Emma and William Randolph's back door, generating power for a single light bulb inside. Across rural America, the whirligig is folk art with hundreds of variations: a wooden cutout of a man chopping wood, a horse galloping, or a woodpecker tapping a tree. The Randolph's whirligig was one of many creative devices that kept life humming in the North Hills during the first part of the 20th century. Like the whirligig, homesteaders there responded to the weather and stayed in nearly constant motion. They relied on makeshift solutions and made do with little. And a few optimistic souls were able to spin with those natural forces rather than against them. Early homesteaders in the North Hills measured success by what comes off the land. Remarkably, the Randolphs, our nearest neighbors, coaxed many products from their place over almost 90 years: milk, beef, honey, eggs, coal, berries, apples, potatoes, and more. Looking at the brown hillsides from town, the average Missoulian would never dream of the smorgasbord of food produced in those hills. But the Randolph place is now valued more for what stays on the ranch: scenery, habitat, and heritage. This is a critical distinction in addressing the future of places like this nearby town. Bill, Emma and William's youngest son, was a quiet, withdrawn man, never seeking the slightest attention. He lived his entire 84 years until his death in 1995 on the homestead his parents had settled, getting by on very little. He spent his last 40 years living alone after his parents died, tending his goats and keeping to himself. Bill was our closest neighbor. A shrubby draw running east and west separates Skyline Ranch from the Randolph place. The land slopes up on each side of the draw, so we could see many ranch activities on the Randolph place, and they could see ours. When I was growing up, it seemed there was always a lot of activity on our side: rounding up cattle, riding horses, branding parties, cars and trucks coming and going on the dirt road. It was always much quieter on the Randolph side. Our kitchen window faced south toward the Randolph place. As an adolescent, I often sat by the black wall phone on a high stool, daydreaming while gazing out that window. I thought the Randolph pasture uphill from the orchard was fenced in the shape of a deer's head, and I somehow took comfort in looking at it. We shared a party phone line with Bill, so on that same stool, I learned to quietly lift the receiver and listen for someone talking before dialing. It was usually free, but Bill's conversations had long pauses, so I was never sure if he was actually on the line or not. Decades later, I still expected to hear his slow voice on the line when I lifted the receiver of a wall phone. Of course, that's no longer the case. Like his father, Bill was a tall, thin man and bore a striking resemblance to Abraham Lincoln. I remember watching him working his way up the ridge in his old truck, hauling scrap iron to use in fence repair. Or I would see him strolling down to the barnyard to milk his goats, bucket swinging beside him with a slow, duck-footed walk. His dog followed along while the goats bleated. The dogs were always collies, appropriately quiet and gentle, like Bill. A patient and kind man, he was known to feed candy bars to his nanny goats. He went to town only rarely, but when returning, he would honk his horn as he came up his dirt road. We'd hear a chorus of mooing and bleating as his animals welcomed him home. It is fitting that memorial gifts were to be sent to the Missoula Humane Society after his death. I knew Bill only when he was a middle-aged and elderly man, but I felt a kinship with him. As an adolescent and teenager, I walked down to see him occasionally, crawling through the fence separating our places and skidding down the bank to his narrow dirt road. I'd bushwhack through native plums, box elder, and prickly rose bushes. I passed the unpainted barn with its worn brown siding and splotchy tin roof, salvaged from industrial cast-offs. Horse stalls and cattle pens lined the central gambrel roof section with its hayloft above. Shed-roofed additions on each end added further to the patched-together look. Farther along, I peered into the winch shed at the old coal mine and ambled by the milk house, chicken house, and goat sheds, heading toward his little white house farther up the hill. It seemed so different on his side of the draw, more cozy, modest, and quiet. The orchard was always a mysterious, shady oasis with its apple, sour cherry, pear, and crabapple trees huddled in the hollow. It was a little spooky, too, with the disheveled carcasses of metal plows and other equipment half hidden in tall grass, and the gnarled apple branches twisting for light. This woodsy part of the homestead was a magnet for wildlife, from nesting owls to browsing deer and the occasional raiding bear. I learned not to be scared as I passed the ramshackle buildings. Maybe the low tinkle of the goats' bells helped. I often carried baked goods or some scrawled message from my parents. Both introverts, Bill and I sat in his sparse kitchen while he patted the dog at his side. The conversations were short sentences with long pauses, but he seemed to like my visits. I'm going to skip some parts about his background. Okay, where am I here? I have just a tiny bit more. Bill remained a bachelor his entire life. By the 1990s, his place was, in most respects, still the homestead that Ray Moon and Bill's parents had created more than 80 years earlier. All but Bill's house, remodeled in 1946 from an outbuilding, are relics of the original Moon homestead. Bill wanted to keep it that way. It is somewhat ironic that such a reticent man became a conservation pioneer in the Missoula area. Before he died, he placed a conservation easement on his land, one of the first landowners to do so on a large piece of land near town. A conservation easement permanently limits development of private land. I'll skip some of those details. Bill worked with Five Valleys Land Trust in Missoula to place the easement on over half of his land in December 1992, 3 years before his death. The easement aimed to preserve and protect in perpetuity and to enhance and restore the open space, historic and natural features and values of the property. Bill sought to prevent his land from being developed after he was gone. Once he signed the legal paperwork at the courthouse, he walked with a couple of the land trust board and staff members to a little cafe close by. Late in life, Bill had become quite deaf, so the conversation was probably difficult. Happy to have made an important step for his land, I'm told he celebrated by ordering cherry pie. Bill's conservation easement made the front page of the Missoulian, and my mom sent the clipping to me in Ann Arbor where I was teaching at Michigan. The land remained Bill's point of reference until the end. On his deathbed, he told my mother he was going to the marble orchard. When he died in 1995, his land had been cultivated for a century. He spent his last days in St. Patrick Hospital, where my cousin Richard worked as a night shift nurse. Coincidentally, Richard had worked with Bill at the stockyards years before. Bill was comfortable sharing stories late at night in the ward's quiet darkness, free of distractions. Bill's window on the top floor faced north. He could see the sunrise over Mount Jumbo and see the soft morning light glowing on the public-facing side of his ranch. He was satisfied it would remain intact. Do any of you know the homestead at all? A little bit, yeah. So now it's in public hands. It's owned by the city of Missoula, and it's a fascinating place. It's covered with this kind of machinery and patched together, fences made out of old bed springs and you name it. And this is on the top of, as you come up Waterworks Hill and head north toward the homestead, at the top is this car chassis that was at one time used as part of a fence. And it's kind of an iconic Missoula memorial in a way. I think I have time for one more that's even shorter before I stop and let you guys talk. And this is from, as background, one of the things that I do in the book is try to spend time on the kinds of institutions that supported ranching right next to town. And those institutions were everything from the fairgrounds to the stockyards and a variety of other things. This one talks about farm sales. And the title of the chapter is A Ranch's Rusty Jumble. We'll never have an auction on this place as long as I'm standing. My mom's ban creates a dilemma: what to do with nearly a century of accumulated equipment and tools at Skyline Ranch now that it's no longer a working cattle ranch. Mom has a worn black and white composition book listing ranch buildings. The tally is 33, including her farmhouse, the log cabin, garages, hay sheds, shop, granary, and storage sheds, and the ranch's 1910 barn. Some buildings are the size of a closet. The others are big enough to house several trucks and tractors. One column of her building matrix is titled Sorted, with almost no check marks inside. There are interesting treasures in nearly all of them, and some contain purchases from auctions I attended as a child. I'm working on cleaning up the sheds, taking stock, and investing myself back into the place, coming full circle after an adulthood outside ranching. Throughout my childhood in the 1950s and early 60s, my grandparents took me to farm auctions. My family called the auctions farm sales, a term that now connotes a real estate transaction more than the selling of old John Deeres. Kids ran around, largely unsupervised, exploring and playing games among the flatbed trailers loaded with chicken feeders, scrap iron, hay hooks, and fence posts. Auction companies or the local 4-H club sold coffee, pop, donuts, and sometimes burgers and hot dogs from the back of a wagon or a pickup. Folks milled around, looking through piles of household belongings arranged across the farmyard or grassy lawn. Furniture, small tools, carpets, and appliances. The auctioneer saved the good equipment for later in the day. That kept people hooked as they waited for coveted items to be sold. Meanwhile, they were apt to make other spontaneous purchases. Household items sold in the morning, while tractors, trucks, and even buildings and livestock came in the prime time after lunch. The auction company lined up trucks, irrigation pipe, balers, and plows in neat rows near the barn. The sale was wrapped up in time to get people home for supper. The auctioneer was a master of timing and crowd control. His rhythmic sing-song kept buyers focused, entertained them, and more than that, cajoled them for the highest dollar. And I write out the auctioneer's spiel, and I'm not going to try to read that. People clustered in front of the auctioneer and engaged in mostly friendly bidding competition. In my early 20s, I fell in love with one of Singer's first electric sewing machines at a farm sale in the Flathead Valley. The black machine with its gold lettering rested in a wooden cabinet with tiny drawers. A middle-aged woman sauntered over, checked it out, and mumbled to me that it probably didn't work and wasn't worth much. But, seasoned by years of farm sales, I knew what she was up to. Of course she bid against me, but I bought the machine and I used it for decades. I remember farm sales as sunny outings along small creeks, beside grassy meadows on gorgeous May mornings. The odors of greasy tools and fresh coffee mixed in the air. My grandparents ventured out to farm sales when the weather was fair, and my time with them was infused with softness and caring. As a child, I was unaware of the melancholy often associated with farm sales. Families held auctions as a result of a farmer's death or illness. A cluster of family members watched from the edge of the throng. Widows preparing to move from the land where they had spent most of their lives watched their china cabinets or washing machines pass into someone else's life. The auctions had an aspect of voyeurism, with people traipsing through the family's belongings, judging the worth of this drop-leaf table or guessing the age of that bandsaw. Farm sales provided important community time, a fair atmosphere for kids, but for adults, a chance to show respect for a dead neighbor. Being there showed concern and helped the family financially. People could find out what farm equipment was going for and socialize with neighbors and friends. A farm sale was a frugal way to obtain farm paraphernalia, from boxes of ball canning jars to anvils and fencing staples. The collective group of auction goers knew the value of these items, not the monetary worth in precise terms, but how to use them. They bought items not to decorate the walls of vaulted ceilinged rooms in a second home, but to make a living in agriculture. The objects could be put back to life to fulfill new dreams. Life continued through these practical pieces of a family's past. Okay. To wrap up, I have one more little comment and then we'll open it up. To wrap up, my book doesn't show an endpoint or a conclusion or a solution, which was impossible, and I struggled with that for quite a long time. And instead what it does as a conclusion is to give sort of a vision of the kinds of things, the kinds of values that a ranching area like this next to town could provide. And so I go through kind of my vision of everything from recreation potential to the scenery, to neighborliness, to conservation and wildlife and plant protection, and a variety of other things. I want to just focus on one that I'm kind of passionate about. Oh, and this is just showing sheds. I should have shown these in that last show, sheds I was cleaning up and the collections that I'm going through on the ranch. I think there's wonderful opportunities for food production in the North Hills. Coming back to your comment, you're asking about what comes off the land. And I think that this whole, the whole local food movement and land near town that can be put into production for food is so important. It's something that I'm really passionate about bringing back to these ranches, which are largely dormant at the moment. And so that's just kind of one comment about the future, or my wish for the future. And there's this astounding amount of diversity of food that was once grown there and could be again through, and coming back to that connection between these ranches and the urban neighbors, and that connectivity that could exist. So I'll end it there. I do want to say that I took it upon myself to do all of the illustrations for the book, and so I have cards in the back with where Allie's selling the books of some of my drawings that I used to illustrate my work here. So with that, let's have a few questions.
Okay, so I will go around and pass the mic around. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and I will hand you the microphone.
So you mentioned the Skyline Ranch. Did that go into a conservancy or?
No,
what?
it has not yet.
Okay.
Hopefully in the future it will, but at the moment it's not.
Thank you so much for this talk. It was amazing. Could you talk
Thank
to
you.
me a little bit about what you see for the future of Missoula and what the land can give back to Missoula a little bit more in terms of, I know Montana Ag is really concerned about droughts in the future, and I know this has been a big discussion not only in western Montana but in eastern Montana where I grew up. I grew up on this borderland that you talk about in western Montana on the west end of Billings and the western farmers, Billings farmers, and so it's been a big discussion with our sugar beet producers and things like that, that we're really coming into a time where drought is a big possibility. So could you talk a little bit more about that in terms of conservation and how you see that kind of blooming out of this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As I said, I think there's a possibility. I'm sure that with the changing climate and changing conditions, maybe we can't grow the same things that my grandfather grew up there and those ranchers in the 40s. But I do still think that it's good grazing land. It's good for growing beef and sheep. We raised registered Appaloosa horses, and they thrived there. Yeah, I think the fire danger is so extreme, and that is really tricky when you live next door to urban areas. That's really, really a challenge. Beyond that, I mean, I would like to see, and another part of sort of my vision, I would like to see more people there. I would like to see these places used more and to bring Missoulians to these places. And that's currently happening at the Randolph Homestead, which is fantastic. So using that as a model, I think it is a wonderful model. I think they could do more on the productivity side, but that's a limit of, resources and person power, to do that. But I think there's remarkable opportunities for education, for recreation. Certainly, my bottom line is wanting to halt development on these places, or at least limit it pretty strictly. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question. It's exactly what I struggled with in trying to wrap up the book because as I said, I had no solution or real conclusion to it. A lot of it is still really up in the air. So, yeah. Comments? Yes.
What made you leave?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Education primarily. Both my husband's education and my own took us out of state in the early 80s. You know, those things snowball and pretty soon you find yourself gone 25 years. That's what happened. There wasn't really a place for me at the ranch per se, and that gets into all kinds of stuff you don't want to hear about. And so yeah, it was seeking education and you know, having kids in school, and yeah, it's a hard question to answer. But I think the bottom line is my husband and I felt, and we leased this ranch, and we leased another ranch out in Grass Valley, west of Missoula, and came to and ran the Old Town Cafe. If any of you know Missoula, we started the Old Town Cafe. And so realized we didn't want to be short order cooks, and that we couldn't ever buy a ranch. So there wasn't a place for us in ranching. My husband went on to be an agronomist. That was the closest he could get to being a rancher. And me, a landscape planner. And ironically, our kids have degrees in geology and geography. So all of us stayed pretty close to the land, even though we left the ranch. Yes?
Do you see your homestead, do you see your homestead going into a conservatory?
Well, I
Or
hope
your
so.
parents or grandparents
Yeah,
or something?
I'm hoping so in the future. I mean, it's not happening yet, and there's discussion, and yeah, I really hope, while I'm on the earth that happens. That's my goal, yes.
Any other questions? Yes.
First, thank you so much for your talk. I was born and raised in the Rattlesnake, and
Okay.
I love
Great.
Missoula so much, and I love that tree. I go
Oh,
and walk
you know
up.
the tree.
I do. I think I probably have like 100 photos of that tree on my
Most
phone.
people in the Rattlesnake know that tree. They
Yeah.
don't necessarily know our name for it, but yeah, that's
It-
so great to
It's
hear.
one of my favorites. But I was wondering, as a Missoulian and Rattlesnake person and historian, I'm always just so surprised by the new things that I learn about Missoula, a place that I think I know really well. So I was wondering what, as you were working on your book or just thinking about this project, what the most surprising thing you learned about your home or your place in Missoula was.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think the thing I didn't know very much, just kind of in pragmatic terms, kind of production terms, the thing I didn't know about was all the coal mining. And looking into that was really interesting. I mean, there were hundreds of people working in coal mines up there at one point. And so the coal aspect, I learned a lot by just interviewing. I was able to interview one of our neighbors who, not the man that I read about, but on the other ranch, on the Hillgate Ranch, which is the Carlson place. I was able to interview him before he died multiple times to learn about how that family operated and how many generations they had worked that land in a very different way than we had. And so I guess what I'm coming around to is this, I got this strong sense of real strong neighborliness among the ranchers in the North Hills, and that I kind of knew from growing up there, but not the extent that I learned more about from as I was writing the book. Yeah, that's what kind of comes off the top of my head. But maybe one more and then take a break.
As you were doing your research, did you notice differences in the way a community like Bozeman is handling things versus Missoula because of the agricultural focus of Montana State?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I didn't do research in Bozeman, and I'm interested in what parallels my book has with places like Bozeman, but I'm not sure. Are you saying because of MSU
Just
and the
that
ag?
you're coming up with different solutions or different approaches to that border line than perhaps the Missoulian area is?
I don't know. I know, well, I do know that the Gallatin Valley Land Trust was a real pioneer in Montana for passing an open space bond and purchasing easements on land near Bozeman that is striking. But when I drive around there now, I kind of think, oh, where are those places? And it seems like it's just kind of sprawling pretty dramatically. So I guess I don't know the answer to that, of how, it's an interesting question. Yes, right, right. And you know, I haven't done an event in Bozeman yet. I will be doing a lecture at the Museum of the Rockies in the spring. They're doing a lecture series on the changing ranch landscape of the West. So, yeah. So stay tuned, yeah. So I maybe need to know more on that topic before I do that lecture. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right, Donna,
Thank you
thank
again
you.
for being here.